Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Hot Path Show. It's a very special episode because it is a special Power of 2 episode, episode 8. We got Tobias here. Welcome in, Tobias. How's it going?
It's going good, thank you.
Yeah, we get
Yeah.
it's another
How
couple
are you
months until
doing?
our next Power of 2 episode. So, exciting day.
That's right. That's right. You gotta celebrate them when they come.
Exactly.
Eventually, it will be the end of the universe for the next one.
Yeah, right. But yeah, anyways, so I'm Johnny, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Netcode for entities because, as some of you may have seen, I just posted up a massive 6-hour long Netcode for entities tutorial where I basically go over the theory of Netcode for entities and just kind of go through the whole process of creating a full game with Netcode for entities. Super happy with the project. It's a MOBA game, similar to a League of Legends or a Dota, something like that. And yeah, I think it's a really good showcase to just kind of show the basic fundamentals of how to use Netcode for entities. And yeah, hope you all enjoy it. So yeah, we're going to be kind of getting into that a little bit later, and we've got a bunch of other just cool Netcode topics for you. But real quickly, we can just kind of go through some miscellaneous announcements here. So Tobias, you have a game that's going to be releasing very, very soon called Just Read the Instructions. You want to say a quick little word on it?
Yeah, I've been working on it for way too long. Fully dots based, co-op first-person shooter. So you shoot a bunch of enemies using all the ECS you can. It's coming out the 10th of April. Yeah, so I'm hard at work on that, and I hope people will enjoy it and see if there's some new ideas there. Maybe that's fun for everybody to enjoy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, it's called Just Read the Instructions, and you can wish list it down in the description below. And one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on this episode specifically is because your game is made with, or it is like a network-based game, but it's not made with Netcode for entities. So I think we could have maybe some interesting discussions to kind of compare and contrast the different network stacks about the custom one that you made versus Netcode for entities and some other things that you had worked on. So yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah, very good subject.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, yeah, a bunch of crazy other stuff going on. If you'll remember, the Dots Community Challenge is still going on right now, where I had announced it on the previous episode of the Hot Path Show, where I challenged you all to make a version of Conway's Game of Life using Unity's data-oriented technology stack and their entity component system. You can see a little thing scrolling down at the bottom, just kind of giving you a little bit more info on that. And yeah, I've been kind of following along in the Discord. A lot of people have been sharing their progress over there, and it's been really cool and exciting to see about how many people are trying to squeeze every little ounce of performance by doing all kind of crazy things out of there. And other people who are maybe a little bit newer to Dots and ECS, who are just kind of using this as a good way to get something up and running using Dots and ECS. It's been very exciting. And I know that Danny, he was showing us the other day his version of something that he was working on. I won't quite spoil what it is because I think he wants to showcase it when we do our kind of community challenge wrap up episode. But it is a very, very unique take on the Conway's Game of Life, and so it's
Indeed.
yeah, it'll be cool to see some of the people who do maybe some little bit of non-traditional things with the Conway's Game of Life. So yeah, again, you have the rest of the weekend, and actually I kind of got some of my dates mixed up when I was originally scheduling it. So you basically have until the end of day on Monday, so at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time is when it is going to end. So still just a couple more days left on that, and yeah. So, then moving on, another very big thing. Next week is GDC, the Game Developers Conference, which is pretty much the biggest conference in game development, which takes place in San Francisco every year. So it is happening next week. Can't believe it's already here. Yeah, it can be really exciting. I'm going to be there, and there's a lot of crazy, cool things happening. So I'm just going to go ahead and run through a couple relevant things here. So on Monday and Tuesday of GDC, Unity is hosting a Dev Summit, where basically throughout the normal convention hours on Monday and Tuesday, they're going to be hosting a whole bunch of different talks about all sorts of things, just kind of general things coming to the Unity game engine. Lots of it seems to be pretty much game focused. They do have just kind of like a initial general roadmap talk at the beginning, so that's going to be really interesting to see just kind of like the things that talk about for Unity 6 and what types of things that they're focusing on adding in there. So those are always exciting to see. There are a couple Dots specific talks. There's one on Dots baking, and there's also a Dots multiplayer one. Both those should be really interesting. And then a bunch of the other talks are related to like rendering and some AI talks as well. So just a whole bunch of good and exciting things in there. If you aren't going to be at GDC, I will be trying my best to just kind of tweet out some live updates about things that they're announcing throughout the Dev Summit, so y'all can kind of keep up to date. So just follow me over on Twitter. My username is TurboMakesGames over there. So I'm going to be, just kind of sending things out as they come. So then later on in the week, so JetBrains, they have a booth and they're going to be hosting some talks at there. And they have graciously invited me to give a little talk at their booth. So this is happening on Thursday, the 21st at 3 p.m. It's just going to be a quick 15-20 minute little talk. I'm going to be calling it how Unity Dots reduces spaghetti code. So I think it's going to be a fun little talk. We're going to just showcase a couple cool little code examples about how, in my opinion, in my experience, that Unity Dots and ECS has kind of simplified a lot of my code, by kind of separating things out so things aren't, as tightly, intertwined together, and we have this nested, nasty web of dependencies, which leads to, crazy spaghetti code. So definitely should be a fun time there. So thank you to JetBrains for inviting me to do that. Again, that's happening Thursday, the 21st at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Don't think it will be recorded or anything like that because it's just kind of something that's, going to be at their booth. So let's see and then after that, then on Friday, we're going to be doing a GDC special episode of the Hot Path Show. So that's Friday the 22nd. Of course, is happening at our regular time of 1 p.m. Pacific. And we're actually going to be broadcasting live from the Unity office. So Unity is giving me a little conference room that I can set up in, where I can just be doing the stream from there. And then we're going to be having Danny join in remotely. And then we're going to be talking about, all the kind of GDC announcements and everything like that that happened throughout the week. So again, that should be a very fun episode as well. That's kind of all the GDC related things. Tobias, you looking forward to any of the GDC announcements at all, even though you're not going to be in attendance?
Yeah, I'm just hoping that there's some new secret stuff that's gonna be unveiled. Unveiled. I have no idea if there's anything. I suspect there's nothing really major right now, but I'm just hoping that some new juicy thing that I didn't know about will be revealed, and you can dig in your teeth into it later from like some Git repository or something. Otherwise, right. I'm just since I'm not in attendance, I will just be focusing on my game more or less.
Yeah, would say I'm keeping my expectations pretty tempered as well, just because, we had Unity Unite only just a couple months ago, where they kind of, this is kind of their first kind of big public event after the whole situation with the runtime fee, and they kind of, went back and like started kind of restructuring some things in their business. So that was kind of like the first thing from that. And then, of course, there's kind of like, the holiday season. And again, of course, Unity has kind of been going through just a little bit more change in general. So, I don't know if I necessarily expect any, big major announcements, but maybe just kind of like a reassurance that they're continuing to focus on games and just kind of, continue to showcase, some of the, nice tools available for us game developers. So, I think it should be a good time regardless, though.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, so of course, if you do want to support our show, you can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/TurboMakesGames. And we have a bunch of cool, fun bonuses there that tie in with the Hot Path show. Of course, when you sign up at any Patreon level, you get access to all our exclusive bonus episodes. So I've done one where I posted a talk that I did on... I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's the one that I did for Jason's Game Dev Guild conference. And I also put up a video for how I would make Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 using Unity Dots. I think that was just kind of a fun, chill little episode. And then also I'm going to be doing kind of like a GDC vlog. So as I'm at GDC, just going to be kind of videotaping my just kind of experience about everything that I do, and kind of be providing some additional commentary as I go along. So if you aren't able to attend GDC, through that vlog, you can kind of maybe get a little bit of experience about what it's like to be at GDC, and just kind of all the fun, exciting craziness that happens throughout the week. So anyways, we can go ahead and get into some of our topics here. So we'll go ahead and start with the prefetch, which is our warm-up topic of the week. Normally the prefetch is just kind of a fun little warm-up topic, but this week I wanted to make it a little bit more topical, just because it is kind of a netcode focused episode today. So Tobias, I know you have a lot of experience just kind of in the games industry in general, and so I wanted to talk to you about some of like the different networking stacks that you've used, and then as we can kind of start just evolving this conversation towards netcode for entities and all that. But for now, I just kind of want to start with just kind of like a good overview about maybe talking about some of the different games and network stacks that you've used, and feel free to just kind of give a high level overview about your thoughts on them as much as you can.
Yeah, so I worked at Stunlock Studios, as some might know, the creators of V-Rising that use dots, and previously they made Battle Right, which that's the major big title I was on from the start to end, sort of. And before that, I worked on Dead Island Epidemic, so not Dead Island, the actual big game, a spin-off, which is technically kind of similar to Battle Right from a network perspective. Both of them use a centralized server situation where the server is completely authoritative, and we used a network transport layer called Leadgren, which is very old open source C# library, which that thing we used extensively for every. But the thing is that a lot of the things that we made was like very custom for the game specifically. So the transport layer were like just sending bits in a reasonable way with good APIs and some latency simulation, some stuff like that built in, and maybe some NAT punch through. I don't know how to say that really, but since we were a centralized server, we didn't need that part of it. But otherwise, on top of it, it was completely custom because of the nature of the game. Esports, super focused on fairness.
Right.
And then I worked briefly on Helldivers, the first one, an expansion, and I wasn't too involved into the network there, so I can't say too much. And then also Just Read Instructions, which I'm working on right now, which is also lead again technically in backend, but it's not at all server authoritative. It's a little bit server authoritative, but it's like the server only sort of controls a few things, and then it's just a free for all the rest of it. And the thing is that, like, I think that the authoritative nature of most games it's a good thing. Obviously, it's like you need that, but it's like it's just like something you very much need because you want the players to have a good experience of fairness. And otherwise, I would never use a server authoritative solution, because there's so much parts that you bring up in your thing that the video you released today, where you need to deal with, like, the server needs to be authoritative and be like the one who decides everything, but you still want to be responsive and make it feel like you're perfectly in control of your character and stuff. And Battle Right had that problem all the way through, because people still found ways to cheat in that game until we had some cheaters in the beginning, and we patched that. I don't remember if we had some cheats that basically could never be fixed, because that's the thing. Some games just have natural ways of cheating that you can never sort of completely remove unless you just ban people who gets reported. That's yeah. So but with a co-op game like Just Read Instructions, since there's no, like, if you want to cheat in it, go ahead. It's your experience that you're
only cheating yourself.
Yeah. So that's but otherwise, I have, from my point of view, I feel like the transport layer, the one where you like pack bit or like how, so you have the data already figured out sort of, and then you just, I need to pack this in reasonable in a package size and then send it. That part of the API, that's a little bit like you can choose whatever fits your situation, but otherwise the other part of it becomes often very custom. I hope uh, network for entities thing, that would actually be a good solution for a lot of games. But network is like, for me, it's like, it's, there's never ever a good silver bullet. It's just like, if you make a game that has complex, fast-paced stuff, you're gonna end up coding a bunch of custom networking things, sort of. And for that thing, I think just a lot of elbow grease from my perspective. So I don't know. I don't. I just like to not have to care about fairness, because that's very hard. And if you manage to not do it properly, your players will be angry. We had several angry players on Battle Right. So I don't know if
I
that
can
answered the
imagine.
question, but that's sort of my view around the network stacks that I've been worked on or similar.
Yeah, no, that is definitely a good kind of overview. It sounds like you have kind of, yeah, had some good experience on different types of network stacks and everything like that. So yeah, it sounds like you were kind of saying like the transport layer, that's the one thing where it's like, you can kind of use almost whatever you want. And then, really dependent on the game, you might end up kind of having to customize it to work with your needs. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, I think that for most people, there's a very good idea to start with something like Netcode for Entity, and not like start with it and stop it. Just start with it, and then you dig into it and make and customize it where you need to be. A
Right.
good thing with a good solution is that you can like dive deep down into the nitty gritty and do custom thing where you need to. And then when you have some random boolean in a game mode situation where you just need to sync it across, then you just like an attribute in C sharp like synced bool, and it should be synced, and then should be it. And that kind of a solution should be also available. But as long as you can dig all the way down and like specify the exact bits that you want to synchronize, as long as you have that range, I think most of the solution, I think the solution is probably all right, because that's really the issue. When you find some very unique gameplay feature in your game, and you're like, oh, I need to very much make this in a very specific way to make it very much flow on all clients and not be jittery or whatever, then you should just go, like, think of the optimal solution and just code exactly that, and don't rely too much on pre-made solutions. That's how I worked on all the games. And with the transport layer, most of the things work, but like we worked on a thing together and
Yeah.
ended up using the nanosocket thing, which is just a
Right.
wrapper on top of C, which isn't really like a transport, but it's like it does fulfills part of this, and just the fastest thing which sends the bytes to the right place, just go with that.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
I I also think Unity has a transport layer package that I think is probably pretty good.
Yeah. Unity does have a transport layer package. I actually was recently working on a project that uses that I'm currently using Netcode for game objects with right now. And there actually is like a little drop down where you can set which transport layer you're using.
Mm.
And by default, when you install Netcode for game objects, it has the Unity's transport layer installed there. But I know of a couple other solutions where people have built out their own, transport layers that kind of do different things, that you could maybe, download from GitHub or something like that and use that as a different transport layer.
Yeah. Oh, I just remembered that actually if you play the game with the custom server, if you play just read instructions with a custom server situation where outside of Steam, so you can do that when it will be released, then it's lead again. But if you play it in Steam, then Steam has the P2P
Oh,
thing
okay.
that goes through the Steam backbone internet sort of thing, and that I use for that, which is super good. You should use that if you're on Steam. That's just excellent. We had a few good relationship with Steam when we with Valve when we made Battle Right, and we got to see a little bit of behind the workings of that thing when it was very much in the beginning. And Steam's networking solutions for game networking is just excellent. So use that if you can. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, that's great.
And also, by the way, sorry to interrupt you once more.
No, no, no.
There's I think there's just like with nanosockets, there's an API call for Steam where you can basically just um, reframe a native array to be sent without any duplication straight into the Steam API and just send this array, so you can skip all copying of everything and just prepare your byte array with whatever floats you want to send or whatever, and then just like hand it over to the Steam API, and it just takes it and does it super efficiently. So that's very nice with native arrays and all of dots.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that kind of leads me into the next thing that I was going to ask you is like with any of these networking solutions that you've used, like has there been anything that has came with them out of the box that was like, super handy to use that was like really helpful for synchronizing certain kinds of data?
I think that what this is, you can either use delta compression, which requires a bunch of different. You need to be a certain amount of reliability since you're doing delta from the last frame, and so you need to make sure that the last frame
Count on
actually,
the,
yeah.
without
Or
it
you
being
can do
corrupted or
like
whatever. Yeah.
harder compression where you can like compress to just the range and the quantization that you need. And LeadGain has a very good library for being able to squeeze down, like, oh, I have a float that represents my health. I don't need to sync 32 bits of float value for my health that's going from 0 to 100, and it like needs 1 decimal point. So as long that's one of those things where I think a lot of network or transport/network engines has this feature, but that's a very good one because that code that does that squeezing and compression is super annoying to write by yourself. It's just a ton of bit manipulation. Then just
Yeah,
you
yeah.
just hate your life when you write that. I've written a little bit of it because of extending lead again, and it just sucks so
Right.
bad.
And it's very error prone too.
Yes.
Like in almost kind of like in that one project that we were working on together that you had kind of mentioned. I remember there was like one error where I think there was like supposed to be a Y and there was like a Z there instead, and like some of the
Yeah,
rotations got
there was like an offset. There was written 8 2 times in a row instead of 8 and then 6,
yeah,
12,
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
think,
That's what it
because
was.
of the
Yeah,
yeah. That's exactly the problem that you get when you don't when you do it manually, because it's like almost impossible to write that perfectly, and then you just have to test the hell out of it to find it.
yeah,
I've written
exactly.
so many bugs like that myself.
So has
Yeah.
that been in your kind of more professional game dev experience? Like speaking of testing, has that been something that's like really important to, write like good unit tests for all your different netcode things to make sure everything is, synchronizing in the correct ways that you think that it should?
I wasn't involved too much into that, so I would say probably not that much, but maybe actually they wrote a bunch of tests that I am not aware of or forgot about because I didn't work directly on it. But also, since we used lead again, there was like a reasonable amount of expectation that some of the functionality didn't need to be tested because we just knew that it would work, especially that kind of bit manipulation. That we just, I
Right.
think that was just plug and play for us basically. But otherwise, like unit tests and stuff, I'm unsure if people how much game developers actually unit test. The lower it is, the more you should unit test it. But I remember like basically just like playing the game until it found a bug and then just looking for the bug and not having
Right.
too many
Right.
unit tests. It's like the old saying, you don't need to sync everything in a network game, you just need to convince the players they are playing together and that's it.
True. True. Yeah, I
So
think,
yeah.
and we'll actually kind of talk about a little of those topics when we actually get to getting a little bit more in depth on the netcode for entities, because there's some cool things that you can do about choosing what data you can synchronize versus not. So I think it's cool stuff.
Yeah. All
Cool.
right.
Yeah. Do you have just kind of any other general thoughts on just kind of any other?
Never do a PvP game unless you want to hate your life for a year. No, I don't know. That's not fair. But it's like it's really annoying to try to handle all the weird things that people try to cheat with. There's like there you know, you have lag compensation, which and that lag compensation is designed to be stretchable so that different regions can play with each other and have a reasonable amount of fairness. But if you fake your lag compensation and go like increase it and then let it go and then increase it and let it go, you can like you can walk faster than you should be able to do. And it's like
Interesting.
almost impossible to find. You can just like let the player walk, and then afterwards you can track where they walked over time and like, oh, they've cheated. And then you can, but in the moment it's almost impossible to detect that kind of thing. So there's just an infinite amount of trickery that players are doing. So if you're going to make a network game and you have not much experience, use a very prepared solution like Network for Entities maybe, or do a co-op game. That's my hard tips.
Yeah, I remember like back in the day, like a lot of my friends, they were like super into like the Call of Duty games back on the 360, and they would just like be telling me about all the different ways that they would, cheat them by using like lag switches and to make their character like stay in place when they would actually like, run around the map and then like shoot somebody else. So
Yeah, it's super annoying to deal with. Yeah,
yeah, so the joys of making a networked game, right?
very joyous.
Yeah. Okay, so we can go ahead and move on a little bit here. So you're taking over our cache hit Unity Dots quick tip of the week here. So you got a couple quick ones for us. So what do you got?
Yeah, so I this was actually something that I was about to tip to add to the like the end link thing, but I didn't find this blog when I was searching for it in preparation. I just couldn't find it, and now I spent like 15 minutes searching with very sophisticated search words, and I finally found it. So I'm gonna link a blog, and I'm gonna explain a few things. Not explain, but show two things that I think is remarkable and fascinating about dots and with C sharp. So I can do like this, right? Is that working? Yeah. So this is a criminally underrated blog, and I think he stopped writing a few years ago. If I read the timeline order of everything is very strange. But we can. So you have the link, but I'm going to show two pages, and I'm going to explain two things that I think is very interesting about the what it brings up. So let me just share my screen here. There we have like that. So add to stage. There we go.
There you go. Got it.
So this is one of them, how native arrays work, and this is crazy deep dive into decompiling the whole as much as possible. Well, he uses the IL2 CPP thing to like write some things about native arrays, and then like go into the compiled C++ code and see what's actually going on. So this is native array, the early version of it from 2018, but I don't think this has changed much. And like I won't go into any detail here, but you can see it's just crazy. So if you're fascinated by this stuff, which I am, I highly recommend to read most of it. Well, maybe not this kind of stuff, but he explains it super well. So there's one thing in this which I think is fascinating, because I see a lot of people who come from C# who uses who comes from normal C#, quote unquote, who uses foreach because it's just like a convenient thing. And I've always had in my mind, like, I don't like, the hiding shit stuff behind the foreach thing. What's going exactly on there? Well, we sort of know what's going on. We know what's going on, but it's still like a little bit of an annoying hidden feature. In this thing, he breaks down how a for loop comes together. And if I can find it, for loops. This is like sort of the assembly for a for loop. And if you do a for each, where was it? I'm sorry, I'm just for each. Here, is it here? Yeah, this is a for each.
Oh,
loop.
wow.
Well, it's probably a little bit more nuanced than that, but a for each just translates to something else than a for loop when you're
Right.
using
Yeah,
a
yeah,
native
yeah.
array. And it's like it's actually a significant difference. So when you're using native collection, I think there's probably reasons to use for each loop still in pure ECS non-managed memory and all of that. But when you straight up iterating over stuff in C sharp in with native arrays, just use the for loop. And maybe this have changed. I don't think so. I couldn't find anything when I searched for it quickly. But this was like first time in my life. First time I'm like yeah, my intuition, like at least with this thing, you should just do the old school C style version of it and just iterate over it easily. And so for is faster than for each working with native array.
That's good to know. And there is one way that we could test that out if we wanted to, just by using like the burst inspector window. We
Oh
could
yeah,
actually
that's fair.
write out the code, and you can actually see the full disassembly of what it compiles down to in assembly code. So that
Yeah.
might be interesting to do. Just a quick little exercise to iterate through a for each loop, or iterate through a native array with a for versus a for each loop.
There's a few comments here about if bursted versions of this. He doesn't bring that up here, but like there's still plenty of times that you want to iterate through a native array when you're
Right,
not
right.
bursted. But that's a good point. It's probably hard tied down into the LLVM, the compiler, to be able to like properly execute whatever you want to do with the native array as fast as possible when it's bursted. Probably a very good integration by Unity there. So that I will. Sorry, I hit my microphone. So I will keep away from that. I don't really know, but it's clear to me that they tied in a lot of things with native array to be very nice. Like also the length is cached. So you don't need to cache the length before a for loop if you go. So it's like already recognizes that well the length won't change according to the code, so we can cache it and not pick it out from the native array data every frame or every loop you're going through it.
Interesting.
And also, for each compiles into an enumerator in mono. Lol. Yeah, it does. But like, there's more nuance. I am not sure exactly when everything is turning into what type of enumerator. So that's part of the reason why it's a little bit tricky to sometimes know exactly how it gets executed. Anyway, that was that one. And then we have another one, which I think is fascinating. I don't have a good solution for what I'm about to show, but something to think about. Are temp allocations always fast? Have you thought about this, Johnny?
Only just because like recently when Danny showcased the what's the state
World
dot
on
world
update.
update allocator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I read this a few years ago, but I haven't been able to really think about it too hard. I don't have time to test out this stuff. But the main point here is that this is allocation, if I understand it, from normal temp. This is from temp job. And this is when temp runs out of its buffer. So when it overflows, and he comes around to is about 16 kilobytes probably. That is the total allocation of the temp allocator, and you can't change it, and you can't dispose it until you come to the next frame. This might be slightly changed at this point. This is an old blog, but still, I'm fairly certain that I have this problem in my game where I run out of temp allocation at a few points.
So that's basically like you're adding too many things to the temp allocation per frame, and then you get over that
Yeah.
what he seems to be about a 16 kilobyte limit. If you go over that, then you kind of have to now allocate some more memory, and that ends up taking longer.
Yeah,
Is that basically what
exactly.
it's saying?
I think I might be wrong. I shouldn't just read all of it now, but I think it's like just defaulting back to like temp temp job allocation. So like it just goes to the other one when it's over, and then you get just the annoying part about you go into trying to allocate the temp, and then you're like there's nothing left, and then you need to go out and do the other allocation, and that obviously takes longer than just doing the temp job from the start. So you shouldn't really
you shouldn't really go hard on temp if you're not concerned about allocation time. This is not access. Access is irrelevant. This is allocating the memory.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
So
still, does take up a little bit of time.
yeah. It's I have like a ton of small red blips in my profiler that says like allocation overflow, and I'm fairly certain that is exactly what's causing it.
Yeah. Well,
And but
this
I
is Wayne Game says you see it in the profiler as a red timeline called fallback allocator.
Oh wow! How about that? yes, exactly. But so that's what I expected. I wasn't sure if it was like that, but that because it's a little bit hard to follow all of the stuff in the profiler sometimes, especially when it's bursted, because it just goes away into unmanaged bursted code, and you can't really understand exactly what's going on inside of there. But yeah. So anyway, this Jackson Dunstan, super good. Go into tags, press like burst, and then you have like 27 super interesting blog posts about super intricate stuff about burst. I can just read this all day. I think it's so fascinating.
Nice. Yeah, I think I came across this site a long time ago before I like really understood like any of the kind of lower level concepts of ECS and all that. So it was like kind of a little bit hard for me to follow along, but I'll definitely want to go through all these things and check them out because yeah, there's definitely some good stuff in here, it seems like.
Yeah. So and then the last thing, which is like I thought about this when I read the native array earlier to just read up to so I remember it, and I want to ask you, Johnny, look at my screen.
I'm looking.
Just and for the viewers also, just look at the lines of code. This is C++.
Yep. Okay. So
Yep.
you have an array. You have the first element is equal to 69, and then one bracket array. What is that?
Yeah. Give it a few seconds. Think about it. Tell me if I should reveal it.
It's not like a pointer thing, is it?
No. Well, technically, it's all of it is pointers.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a C++ array. It's just a pointer. But that's part of the chat has already sort of figured it out. But it's like it's mind screwing the first time you see it. So should I point out how it works?
1 plus array. Yeah, what is it?
So what's happening here is like when you have array and then the index. So this would work if in C# too, because well, maybe not with managed memory, but generally speaking, this is same for every language. It's just that the compiler won't allow it because it's just a weird thing to do all over. But in C++, they're like, well, it's the same thing. So when you're having array, we can do like this to make it even more clear. These lines are completely identical in function. So what's happening is like array is like an allocated pointer somewhere with 3 elements after that pointer. Maybe it's on in memory location 605. And then you pointing this thing just says like, oh, go 0 steps into that 6005 or whatever I said, 605. And then you assign that value 69, right? This thing is like, oh, go 0 steps in, and then you take the 605 offset, and then you get to the same point.
So it's just backwards, but the same thing because it's
exactly
just
the same
an
thing.
addition.
And C++ will even allow you to do this however you wish. Even this is the same, like it's just as putting
You do
a 2
some math
instead.
operations ahead of it. Interesting.
This is like when you see this and it's like it sort of demystifies memory for you. It's just a counter somewhere it's just a big number. That's it. It's just a big number, and at every point in the number there's a byte. That's it.
Are there any like practical uses of that specifically, or is it more just kind of like giving you more options to access memory in different ways?
I think I don't know about any reasonable reason to use this at all. I just know that from the perspective of the compiler in C++, since the array will be down compiled to just accessing a memory allocation, the same thing that this will be. Well, this will be referencing a constant memory allocation, but this will just be two numbers, and the square brackets just means that you're adding the two numbers together, and that's a memory address. That's it. So there's functionally the same thing, and C++ doesn't have a reason to enforce it to be something else. To it's like, well, it's just two numbers that I
Yeah,
add, and then
sure.
I point to that number. So yeah, I find this fascinating to like demystify how memory works, and then you're like, oh wait, it's just a big it's just a big array of numbers. That's it. That's all memory is.
No, that's awesome. I like that. Just kind of getting down to yeah, the raw memory access, and I think it's really good to just kind of understand those things, even outside of the typical ECS and C# and burst context that we do, just to really get a sense of kind of what's going on under the hood, and maybe give us some more ideas about how to optimize things.
Yeah, yeah. They since native collection, I believe, is more or less C or C++ based implementation. This is what's going on, and not exactly this, but this is they're dealing with memory in this type of a way in the background. If I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that's it for the cache hit.
Great. And yeah, I guess it does look like there is a practical use for this, which is writing your code in such an awful way that you're the only one who could fix it. So you have job security.
Job security, yes. Very, very good point. Yeah.
Sweet.
All right.
Well, thank you for showcasing that. So now we can move over to our context switch here. So what I wanted to bring up, again, this is kind of the Netcode for Entities themed day here. So let me go ahead and I will share my screen here. So some of you may have seen that Megacity Metro, which is kind of the new .megacity, the URP version of Megacity, has been released. So yeah, we can, let me just play a little video of what we got here to give you a little idea of what's going on. But yeah, it's just kind of the typical, this is kind of the original Megacity right here, but then they created a newer version of it that works with URP, and it works on, like mobile phones and, all different types of devices. And it is completely multiplayer. It says it supports, over 128 players, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, this is kind of a new sample project that Unity just released yesterday. So yeah, if you go to, I'll put the website down in the chat here. You'll have to check it out. And then on this site, it links off to the GitHub repository, so you can actually download all the full source code and learn from it and everything like that. So yeah, it's just kind of really cool that we have a new Netcode for Entities sample project to learn from. By the way, they do have another webinar that's going to be happening on March 27th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So you can sign up for this webinar. Sounds like they're just going to be probably going over a couple things in the Megacity Metro. And I think the GDC talk about Dot's multiplayer stuff is kind of focused around this Megacity Metro here. So yeah, Tobias, I know you said you had checked out this a little bit. So what was kind of your experience with downloading it, setting it up, and playing around with it for a little bit?
Well, it was zero problems with any of it, really. I just checked out the GitHub and started up in Unity Hub and installed the version, and it just worked on the first try. So I think that's a good thing. That's not always the case with Unity.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the original Megacity one, I had tried to set that up on my machine, and you had to find some like really obscure Unity version for it. And even when you did manage to open it up, there was like a bunch of errors that you kind of had to correct and everything. So
yeah.
Good to know that this seems to work kind of out of the box. And I think I also heard that is it using a Unity 2023 version?
Let me see here. I have it. It's using 2022 3. Well, I think it's the latest 2022.3.
Okay. I thought seen somewhere that it was that someone said it was using the 2023 version, but yeah.
I don't think so. I might be mistaken, but I'm looking just through my like checkout and see if I can see any changes in the version of it. But my it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, yeah.
No, yeah, 22.3.20. So I just used 12 instead of 20 because that's what I had downloaded. Apparently, I didn't install a new version. And in 3.12, it was working just the same.
Awesome. Awesome. And do you know what version of ECS it's using? Is it 1.0 or is it 1.2? I suppose I could probably
I can
look in
open
the,
it on my computer here and see if I can check it out.
we can actually just probably dig through the GitHub here. So if we go to packages.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So, okay, so it is the 1.2.0 dash pre.6. So not the latest available, but still a fairly newer pre-release version. And yeah, the netcode and physics are all in that 1.2 pre-release. Okay, so that's nice to know that it's on a kind of newer version.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, have you gotten a chance to really like kind of dig into the code at all and check some things out in there?
Yeah, I dug through a little bit of it. I started it and then I just like looked at like the 5 most interesting systems according to their name. But like I think it's just a very like nice tight thing for people who have not worked with ECS too much. For me, it wasn't really any surprises, which I think is a good thing, since they are not releasing a bunch of new features that I know of with this. It's just like this is how you do it properly with in URP. The only thing they use Netcode for entities, which I haven't used, and the
Right.
loading thing, which is a game object version thing that you convert into when you
Oh,
swap
okay.
so the loading thing also like something I don't use in my game. I don't really need it. Otherwise, it was just every time of all the systems that I brought up and looked through, I was like, yeah, that's sort of how I imagine it would be, and that's a good thing. Straightforward, and yeah, I think it's a great example.
Nice. Yeah, good to know that it's kind of straightforward, a good kind of sample that people can learn off of. I definitely want to start poking around with this a little bit myself, but of course I was finishing up some things with the big netcode for entities tutorial, which we'll be talking about in a sec here.
I should add that I didn't look too much into it, but they had the splines that the traffic is going by was integrated in ECS in a way. I didn't have time to look at it but that's something that I would want to look more into because it looked like they used the new Unity
The
package
Unity
that's
spline package.
yeah, and it was a fancy way, not well fancy, but straightforward way to put in that straight into game AI components, which is pretty nice.
Okay, so
Considering
they were doing some kind of conversion to get that over into unmanaged memory.
that I didn't have, I don't know, but they very much had the data of the spline in dots format somehow.
Because
and
yeah,
it
in
integrated
theory,
nice.
you could kind of take the use the spline as kind of like an authoring component, and then be able to have a lot of those different points stored in your I components, and then be able to calculate where any points on that curve should be.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I think that would be something to look into because I use a very very old and curve thing where I make blob assets out of every curve, like animation clip curve. Or animation curve, that's the name, the old style, and I use that for a lot of spline work. But this spline is, also like in full 3D in the scene, so that's even more flexible. Yeah.
So when you say that you're storing the splines in a blob asset, are you doing like you're storing kind of like the points and handles and then like being able to calculate any given position on there? Or do you kind of like pre-calculate a bunch of positions at like a
No,
fixed step?
it's the full math representation of it. No sampling.
Nice.
Uh,
Okay.
it's very strange. It was a thing that was built for a very early experiment of dots animation uh, that they have sort of taken off the shelf, and they don't even advertise it anymore because it was very rough. And they had to have some sort of animation curve built into it. So it's not really spline exactly, but it's still would be nice for
Similar
some
concept. Yeah.
similar concept where you have a bunch of points and you don't really know how many. Like you can't have a fixed list all the time or a fixed amount of points. You need to have like, oh, this spline is 60 points long. That you need to be able to deal with that in dots, and that's not always trivial. But also in blobs, you can allocate a blob array and just like shove how many points you want in that, and then have that accessible through any bursted code, any parallelized code, because blobs are immutable objects. So I use that old thing where Unity actually took their own animation curve and made it possible to use in dots, and then made it nice, and then they just took all of it away again and like, no, you can't have it. So I found it and I extracted just that curve code, and I made up my own little library of it.
Nice. Do you by chance have a link for that? I think someone was asking for it, or do you know what it was kind of called, how they could look it up?
I can probably find it. I can also actually just like host like my version of it on my GitHub and just link that. Maybe I can just throw that together when you're deep into the instruction set a little bit, or maybe we can post it later. I don't know. I could just share it. I don't know how to find it anymore.
Yeah, we could maybe have you post it later or something, or even maybe I'd recommend checking out what Unity is doing in this Megacity metro for their splines. That could be a other interesting resource to look into.
Splines and curves are very useful. So yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I know. I had made a video a while back where I was doing more of kind of a curve sampling and then just basically storing that in a dynamic buffer, I believe.
Usually that works pretty good.
Is a pretty just simple solution if you don't want to have to worry about doing any math or anything like that.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, I wouldn't have done it unless Unity provided it straight up for in this way. So yeah.
Right. And then so with the LODs, like you mentioned, is that it? So it basically uses like kind of the game object LODs as like an authoring component for some things.
This is where I fail in my knowledge a little bit. I think so. I've always like been, you download assets from the Unity Asset Store, and they're loaded like hell, which is a good thing, but maybe not always. I never really dug into how that works, because it seems to be very just straight up converted into dots representation. They use it all the time in the basically everything in the whole Megacity demo is loaded. So that probably is something that just is very tightly integrated nowadays. But for me, it was something that I didn't know how really it worked, because I don't need to use it.
Gotcha. Do you use any type of lotting solution in your game? Like anything that you built out personally, or?
Yeah, I use light loading because shadows are expensive as.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm that's something that I'm confused that Unity hasn't made more about, because like being able to like, oh, there's a light over there, but you should be able to like, oh, when you come close enough, you should have like a pool of this is how many shadows I can have, and wherever you look, it like refreshes that shadow or whatever, that type of thing. There's so much stuff you can do to optimize what light gets shadow updates every frame, and I think there's very little tooling in Unity, so I built a lot of that for myself, because I have a ton of streetlights, and having streetlights without dynamic shadows when you walk under them. It's very underwhelming.
I can imagine.
Yeah. But if I have all the street lights in my game fully shadowed, it tanks the performance instantly.
Oh, I could imagine. You're
Yeah.
running it like 1 frame per 3
Yeah, well, not
seconds.
that bad, but it's like 15 instead of 60. It's like a fourth almost. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't have any other loading, I think. Certainly not graphical loading like that.
Gotcha. All right. Well, yeah, I know you haven't really had a chance to play too much around with the Megacity Metro, but is there anything else that you had came across that you thought was interesting that you might want to bring up?
No.
Yeah,
I don't
one
think
thing
so.
that I want to do, I definitely want to download this, play around with it myself, and just deploy it to one of my phones and just see how well it performs
to
on a
phone.
mobile device. Because
Yeah, that's
at Unite they actually had some like Samsung Android phones just out, and they you could play it and it seemed to work pretty fine. Like it played pretty smooth, and yeah, so I just want to see how easy that would be for me to create a build of that, put it on my phone, and see how well it runs.
yeah, that's a very good, because since it's like, if that thing can run on a phone with good performance, that's a very good litmus test of the dots thing overall.
Yeah, certainly. Cool. Well, yeah, make sure you I'll go check out Megacity Metro. So let me go ahead and remove this, and then I can go ahead and share my screen here. Again, I'm going to be talking a little bit about I'm going to be talking a little bit about Netcode for entities here. Like I mentioned, that I did just release this tutorial where I go through the full process of creating this MOBA game with Netcode for entities. This tutorial was a very long time coming. I know it was at GDC last year in 2023, where that's where they initially kind of came out and announced that if you're making competitive games, using Netcode for entities is basically the way that they're suggesting people to do it. So it was like, from that moment I was like, okay, my next like big tutorial is going to be on Netcode for entities, and then ended up procrastinating for a good couple months there, and then started picking it back up in maybe like August or September, where I started kind of learning Netcode for entities a little bit more. And then since then I've built out this full tutorial, filmed it and everything, and I'm quite happy with how it came out. So yeah, I kind of just wanted to just going to do a little bit of kind of like a free-flowing conversation where I'm just talking a little bit about Netcode for entities, maybe just give you kind of like a quick overview about how some things are set up in the editor. Of course, don't necessarily want to get too in depth, because I have a whole 6-hour tutorial where it basically shows you everything on that. And then just kind of talk a little bit like open about just kind of my experience with developing Netcode, this Netcode for entities project, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. And of course, if you all have any questions for Netcode for entities related things, and if there's anything specifically that you might want to see, feel free to just go ahead and drop those in the chat. So anyways, let me just give you a quick overview of the project for people who might not be quite familiar with it yet. So I'll go ahead and do this, and there's a specific, okay. So, I'm getting all kinds of errors right now. So a couple of things. This is kind of one of the annoying things, is there's just like weird little errors that happen from time to time like this, and usually you can fix them by just going to the scene here, unloading the sub scene. Also over in the project settings, there's this global netcode asset, and I'll show you what this is. This is one of the things that I wanted to show off here. So it's just basically a scriptable object, just kind of like a standard asset that you can see in the inspector here. And it basically has all of the like netcode configuration things. So this is where you set like, your simulation tick rate and client tick rate, and, some specific things related to prediction. And so you can, really dial in and tweak all these different settings. So you can get really granular with these. These are pretty much all just the default settings right here. The default settings have worked, just fine for what I've needed for this testing. But great to know that the option is there for us to get really granular with these. So one thing that you can do with this netcode config asset is you can have a global netcode config asset. So that's this one right here. So what I've had to do in the past is just say find and set, or click this set button here. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, we can actually start this without errors here. So yep, we are good now. So we can go ahead, and so this is basically the game right here. So you'll see that there are kind of these champions. So I have control over this one here, kind of in the down lower left corner here. And then there's these other ones that are moving around. The other guys who are just kind of moving in these random directions, these are thin clients. So these are basically like a simulated player, and then we're simulating just kind of like random input, just kind of like, having them click in random directions, and you see they move towards them. And then the guys moving down the middle of the lanes, these are just kind of like regular NPC AI minions. And these minions, they actually have some a little bit of logic to detect when enemies and other things are nearby, so they can actually shoot attacks over to them. And then this is also built with the kind of combat system that I was showcasing in a couple episodes of the Hot Path show, where I have these different attacks where I can spawn this large attack here, or I can also have this skill shot where we have like a little arrow here on the map, and then we can shoot these shots out into the world. And of course, typical MOBA stuff like you'd expect. We have different towers and then a base at the end, and when you destroy the base, you win. And then also there's just kind of other things that you'd expect, like entity respawning. So when your champion dies, then you get this little respawn message. And then you'll see that once this respawn thing is up, then I actually do just go ahead and respawn back in my base here. So kind of a just good little overview of the project. Is there anything, Tobias, specifically that you want to see from here, or should I just start getting into some of the other netcode stuff?
No, I think you should just get into it. I'm excited.
Sweet. Sounds good to me. So yeah, one thing that I do have set up.
Sorry, I just realized I can just post a link to the curve thing. I just fixed that very quickly behind. Yeah,
sweet.
Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
No, you're good. Cool. Thanks for that. So yeah, the way that this basically works is one thing that we do is, so yeah, typically when you install just the entities package and you start the game, you see what happens is in I guess we could look in the entities hierarchy. You could see that we start in the default world, just like this. So this is just kind of the regular like entities world where all of the entities related things that we're creating, as well as our systems, are all going to pop up in this default world. However, by default, when you actually, I can probably best to show this if I switch over to that connection scene. Go to the scenes and the connection scene here. So I have this little bootstrapper that I'm just going to go ahead and turn off here, or turn back on, I guess. So yeah, by default, if you install the Netcode for Entities packages, what's going to happen is it's going to create a server world and a client world, and it's also going to create a world for any of the thin clients that we have created. Now, this is actually a really handy feature. This is something that I quite like about Netcode for Entities, is because we have all these worlds that are all completely separate from each other. It makes it really clear about what things are in what world, and we can have specific systems run in specific worlds or specific types of worlds. So for example, maybe there's kind of like some input systems. We only want those to run in, say, the client world. Maybe we have some random input systems for our thin clients. We can have those only run in the thin client worlds. And then maybe there's some specific, server side only logic that we can have run in only these servers. So it's really nice, and we can just kind of, go through these different worlds, and we can see which entities are associated with these different worlds. So I think that's, one of the pluses of the Netcode for Entities, is just having these things kind of all separated out here. And it, really helps with debugging, especially like, as we connect a build, we can actually kind of like inspect in the different worlds, and just kind of get some eyes on the things that are showing up in those different worlds. And then, so yeah, so
Is
by
there
default, what was that?
a thin client for every a world for every thin client that you should
Yeah.
see in the game? Oh,
Yeah. So that is one of the things that is kind of they do note about thin clients is you kind of want to be careful with how many thin clients that you spawn because you kind of have to simulate all those different worlds on your CPU. And especially if you have large amounts of dynamic physics objects and those simulations are running every frame across many different thin client worlds, that can get quite expensive.
yeah.
So I think there is like the limit of thin clients is like 1,000. I haven't went that high. I mean, maybe should we try and melt my computer right now?
Why not? See if
Let
the
me
stream crashes.
let me do 100, and yeah, we'll see if the stream crashes. So yeah, actually, let me finish this thought before we play around with that too much. But so yeah, basically, then I have this bootstrapper game object just kind of in our main scene here, and this has a mono behavior on it for the auto override automatic network bootstrap. So what I've done is I've disabled this. So now when I enter play mode, let me put no thin clients for now. You'll see that it just spawns the default world. So it doesn't spawn the server world as well as all the client worlds. Kind of the purpose for that is because, when we're actually wanting to connect into a real game, we want to have a little bit of control about, when these actual server and client worlds are being created. Of course, if we're making a build of the game where it's a client only build and they can only connect to the servers, we don't want it automatically spinning up a client world or anything like that, or a server world. So yeah, we can kind of have a little bit more control by just kind of putting this disable the automatic bootstrap here. And then in the tutorial, then I show you how to actually create new worlds for the server and client, and it's pretty easy there. So now that we've disabled that, let's just go ahead and say, yeah, we'll do 100 thin clients. Actually, this isn't going to work because I have some things over here in the MOBA scene where I I'll have to reload this scene. So I have these like game start properties. So I have a maximum players per team here. Actually, I don't even know if this is going to work, but we'll see.
I'll be ready to take over the stream if you're disappearing from a flaming computer.
So, I mean, it's definitely running a lot at a much lower frame rate, but I'm only seeing 4 entities. Yeah, there's probably some things in there. Oh, okay. Oh, I know why. So I set up this thing where you see when I enter play mode that it brings me back to the connection scene. And I realized that I could probably add some logic to like save this scene. But if the scene isn't saved, then it keeps the like what it was before you saved,
Right.
and then it runs that. Yeah, that's all broken. I have probably some things in there that limit it. So anyways, that's not going to work. But yeah, the funny thing about thin clients is, let me see if this is actually going to break here. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So you see that I have a number of thin clients to spawn is 9. So we'll go ahead and enter this here. Oh, and I still have this set too. Anyways, sometimes what happens is when you start the game in full screen mode, it doesn't spawn thin clients. I guess the reason for that is because these play mode tools right here update in the like editor update.
Oh, right.
And when this is maximized, then like, yeah, you don't
Doesn't run it properly.
It doesn't run and doesn't actually spawn the thin clients. So just a little quirk. I put up a little bug report on the forum and they're aware of it. It sounds like that's going to get fixed in the next version here.
That's good.
So yeah, that's kind of most of what's going on in the editor here. So yeah, let me take a look at just kind of like a couple interesting things that I wanted to showcase as far as things that are going on in the code here. And this is something that you had kind of briefly mentioned to me that you use in your game, which are RPC components. So RPCs are a pretty typical thing in networking. It's basically just a way where you can like send a single message from one machine to another, or maybe even from the server, you can broadcast that out to all the clients. So these are just, good for kind of like one-off messages. The way that I use these in the tutorial are for things like, when a player wants to request to enter the game, they basically send this RPC request up to the server and say, hey, can I enter the game on the blue team? And then the server kind of does some validation logic to see, hey, do I have room to put this client on the blue team? If I do, I'm gonna go ahead and put them into the blue team. But if I don't, then I have them basically set up as a spectator in the game. And actually, before I get too deep into these RPC components, one thing that I do want to point out is I do have, if you see here, I do have a spectator mode. So let me just go ahead and zoom in on this a little bit. So for team selection, you can do the auto assign team, or you can choose manually the blue team, the red team, or join as a spectator. One of the cool things about this is you basically get this like spectator mode essentially for free, because all a spectator is it's just a client to the game, but they don't have a player that they can control. So it's basically just receiving the exact same snapshot data from the server, and it's just kind of displaying that, and you still have your camera controller, so you can go around the screen and everything like that. However, you just don't have a character to control. So I thought that was really cool. As I was going along, I was like, okay, I can spawn people on this team or that team, and I'm like, wait, I wonder if I can just make a spectator mode just by not spawning a player for a given client. And sure enough, that works absolutely fine. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, boom, I get a free feature. So
I think I have they exactly the same in my network solution also, and I think it's part of it is a product of how Dots makes it like you can, if you just it makes these kind of modularized things pretty easy to do, where you can, you don't have a player, so a bunch of system just doesn't run at all, and it's like I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I think it's a part of it is that Dots is very easily modularized and like separatable in that way, because I just had to think about it while I implemented my player to like, let's not tie the player system into anything but input, and then as long as I don't have the player instanced, everything will run as usual, just no player to control. And so I have the same thing, which is I think that would be harder to do in any of the previous games that I worked on in regular mono behavior or like that, but just in C# in general. It's just a little bit trickier to do it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, because again, there are certain systems that I have in the game where it has like a require for update of like the owner champ tag. So it's like if the owner doesn't have a champion, then that system is just not going to run. So it you don't have to worry about it basically. So really cool stuff. So anyways, coming back to these RPC components. This is kind of like basically the way that you define them. You just define it like a regular iComponent data, except you just use the irpc command. And then, so on our client, we should have a request game entry system. Client request game entry system here. So what you basically do here to create one of these RPCs is you create an entity, which is going to be essentially your RPC entity. So I have this request team entity here. And so just using an entity command buffer, I'm just going ahead and adding some components. So I'm adding this MOBA team request, which is that kind of custom RPC component. And I can just go ahead and set the values of whichever team that client requested to be on. And then the way that you actually send this up to the server is by using this send RPC command request, and then you pass in the connection target. This pending network ID is basically this local client, who this command request is coming from. So Yeah, so yeah, basically what happens is just by adding these two components to an entity, then it sends that RPC up to the server. And then over on the server side, we have a server system, which is this server process game entry request system. So this one's a little bit longer because it kind of does some, validation logic to see, what team can the player go on and stuff of that nature. But really what's happening here is we're just doing a foreach query, and we're querying for this MOBA team request, again, that custom RPC component. And then this time we're looking for the receive RPC command request. So you send it with the send RPC command request component. And then when that gets replicated across the network, then it's going to have this receive RPC command request. And that's how you know that it's kind of like an incoming RPC. And then basically from this, we can handle those RPC requests. So I wanted to bring this up because Tobias, you had mentioned earlier that you use kind of like a similar setup in your game. Is that right? Oh, you're muted.
I have it works more or less the same. I don't have like a execute thing command that you add on top of it. Mine is just you add an attribute to the component, and then you say which ones should be synchronized, and then I code generate. So whenever you create an entity with a certain I component on it, it will just immediately snatch it up and send it over the network and delete it. So there's no like execute component on it to tag it. The whole component,
like
just
the send and receive components, you mean?
Yeah. Well, on receive, I get it attaches incoming command component onto it, so you can see who it came from. Whenever you create an entity with a specific component declared as a network component or a PC, it just sends it and deletes it instantly. So it's like a little bit different, but effectively identical in practice.
Yeah. And that is one other thing that I want to point out is you'll see that what I'm doing immediately is destroying the entity, well, scheduling the destruction of the entity. Because, if you don't delete it, then you start getting some errors because, this RPC should only really be valid for that, one frame that it was received on.
Yeah.
And then, another kind of core component that I wanted to talk about that I think works pretty decently well is the concept of ghost components. So ghost components, or ghost entities rather, are basically the way that kind of more traditional data is synchronized across the network in real time here. So the way that is done, I can show you through one of these prefabs. So if we go to, say, the champion prefab, you see that I have this ghost authoring component, so that we basically just add this to the entities, and this kind of tags this prefab as a ghost, saying that basically what a ghost is it's all it is just kind of like a way for you to view data from the server. So really you're kind of getting the this constant stream of data from the server. And so, of course, this makes sense that it applies to remote entities where, when other people are moving around in the game, that you basically just get a view of them, of where they are at any given time. You're just getting that kind of live data from the server. But, the champion that you own, this is also considered a ghost component. So really, or a ghost entity. But so really, your client, it is just kind of, again, like a view only from the server. However, using things like client prediction, which we might talk about a little bit in this portion of the video here, is it's kind of doing some kind of a little bit of like faking to give the player a good responsive experience, so that when they click, that their visual representation of the entity moves, even though it really is just kind of a view only, getting that data from the server. So the way that this kind of works in code is, let me come over to, probably the champion components has a bunch of different ones that I want to showcase in here. So you'll see here, this is just kind of like the simplest representation of a ghost component that we could do here. So this is the MOBA team. So this basically synchronizes what team an entity belongs to. And you see that all we need to do is just add this ghost field attribute on here. And this basically means that this field is going to be constantly updated from the server. Now, there's probably more efficient ways that I could set this up for this specific thing, because in theory this team shouldn't be changing throughout the duration of the application, but it just is a good idea to showcase this concept in a simple way here.
I think that's probably a good way to do it, because I suspect that it's snapshot-based synchronization. So they have a copy on the server of exactly what all the different clients have already. So unless you change it, nothing's gonna get synced probably.
Yeah, I think there's like kind of different modes. Different synchronization modes. So there's these optimization modes. So static is the ghost will only be added to a snapshot when ghost values actually change. And then a dynamic, the ghost will be replicated at a regular interval, regardless of whether or not its values have changed, allowing for more aggressive compression.
Oh, right. So yeah, the compression thing there is different than what I thought about. That makes it slightly different. But otherwise, the static thing was the one that I thought for a simple value like that would be the case. But yeah, so probably not the worst thing to do like that, but it could be simplified. As you said also.
And again, this team type, I believe this is this is a single byte here. So
the question is if it's if the generated code actually uses two bits to synchronize that, or if it's synchronizing a whole integer.
That's a good point.
that's the optimization that should be done.
Yeah.
So
anyways, this ghost field basically means that this data is going to be constantly updated from the server. Now, one of the things that definitely tripped me up at the beginning of my kind of Netcode for entities learning was just the fact that this is a server authoritative model. So there were some times where I was like setting some values like this on the client side. However, they weren't like actually changing across the network. So I'm like what the heck is going on? Like I don't understand why that is, and that's because that basically, again, these ghost components, you can essentially think of these on the client side as they're basically just read only from the server. So there's nothing actually stopping you from setting the components on the client side. However, it doesn't actually change it. It doesn't push that change up to the server at all. And then what happens is the next time the client receives a snapshot from the server, well, it just overwrites whatever value that you've changed with whatever the server has. So that definitely tripped me up a lot, because I was like just doing things that I was used to, like setting components as I would expect to, but it just like those values just kept getting clobbered by whatever was kind of on the server. So that was definitely like something that I had to kind of wrap my mind around with this server authoritative model. Have you kind of ran into anything like that when dealing with any server authoritative stuff that you've used?
Yeah. But the thing is, I think, this is not really a criticism of Unity. It's just that I think this way of phrasing the problem is not the only way. Like ghost, and then you change your own the stuff you control. You need to like RPC change that or something, or do some movement prediction stuff to send to the server. Like, oh, I'm moving, and then you see your own ghost. That's how you see that you move. Sort of. It's a little bit weird phrasing from my experience, but it totally makes sense also.
From a technical level, yeah.
Yeah. So in bad or right, it's technically or like in practice it worked like that. It was just phrased in a different way, and in this is a perfect example of where just read instruction, which is not server authoritative, has a this thing I can do exactly, but the same type of route that and authoritativeness I can replicate, but I also can say I have owner mode on it, so you either are the owner or the server is the owner. So you can this is the case where everything that is a ghost field is automatically owned by the server, because there's no other way to do a server authoritative solution. You cannot own the data. But in my case, I could say, the player owns its team type value, right? And then if you change it, then you are authoritative, and that will sync up to the server and get distributed along all of the. So that's, I think it's more of a phrasing thing that is a little bit confusing, because this is more or less how it worked every time I worked with the server authoritative systems.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, actually, I know Netcode for game objects has something similar, and it's funny. I see someone mentioned this network variables, where basically you can set like who has like the ability to write it. Like, does the owner have the ability to write to that component, kind of thing?
Yeah. And then you can have the owner, which I started with, is all. So anybody can change it, and it will locally detect and push it up. And then the more I developed my game and I thought I would be using that, the more I realized that is a really bad idea. Somebody should own the value and nobody else changes it. It can be the client, but everybody should not have ownership of any variable ever.
Right.
So,
Right. So, yeah, then this kind of gets into a little bit more of like the interesting things about, like, we can get really crazy with these ghost components here. So you'll see that on this particular one, I have the ghost component attribute above this component here. And so this says I'm setting the prefab type to ghost prefab type dot all predicted. Basically what this means is, this is kind of a cool feature that I like about Netcode for entities, is the entity archetype for a given entity can actually be different depending on which client that you're on or which server you're on or whatever. So basically what in this means for this particular case is this champ move target position. This component type is only going to exist if this ghost is considered a predicted entity. Now, ghosts can be basically considered predicted or interpolated. Essentially, you typically would want like a predicted entity as like, maybe a player ghost that's close by to you. So it's running that kind of prediction logic to kind of, predict ahead about, where it's going to be and things of that nature. However, for things that are further away, things that you aren't as relevant to the player, those are more often found to be interpolated ghosts, where it's just kind of like, interpolating between the, most recently received network snapshots to determine where something needs to be. So it's not like necessarily as up to date and accurate as that. So kind of what I'm getting at with this is, if this ghost is considered an interpolated ghost, then this component is actually just not going to exist on that entity. So one of the advantages of that is, now we're no longer syncing this float3, this extra data here. So that, saves us on a couple bytes for those particular entities that are kind of further away. And then, again, we just don't need this component because, say, for example, if an entity is close by to us, we want to know kind of its target position, which is, what this component is all about, so we can predict the movement of where it's going to go. However, if it's something further away, we don't really care about what its target position is. We do still care about its, regular transform position, and that stuff is still being synchronized, but we're just not predicting its movement. We're just kind of getting its movement in the more interpolated fashion. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. This is nice stuff to deal with. I have similar, but this way more complicated, specialized. This is very good generalized way of dealing with it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's a really cool thing that we can kind of change the entity makeup of these components. Another thing that we can do here is another parameter we can set is the owner send type. So owner send type, I think this kind of is, I don't think this quite gets into, some of the things that we were just talking about. But yeah, we can say send to owner type. And so we can say, I've kind of used this where it says, you can say send to non-owner. So this basically means that the server is going to send, an update for that component to everybody that does not own that, or that is not that owner entity. So an advantage of this is now from the client side, we could set this data values to something that we want, but just be aware that that's not going to be in sync with what the server has. So the server is going to be maybe sending out other data for this particular component to the other clients.
So if I understand this correctly now, this would be like if you have a local state for your player that you're dealing with, you're still, server is authoritative, but you're controlling it through RPCs or something like that. And the full, you have sort of that the whole state on your computer, and you can do all the visual flares around it that you need to represent the game object, but maybe you realize that, I only need to send this a little bit of a little position over to the other ones so they can replicate the visual expression of the thing, but I don't want that back. I don't care because I already know about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that is something that I use this for at another point in the tutorial, where I say, we already know what this is on our client side, so we don't need to worry about this, but that still needs to be replicated out to the other clients.
Yeah, and you can often squeeze that down to only the little thing that I need to be able to represent it properly on all the clients. Then when it's maybe it evolves into a bigger attack or something, then you're well, that's a different RPC call altogether or something. So sometimes it's well, I just need a little bit of position so everybody knows what I'm doing, or something like that. Yeah. But it's a nice interface.
Yeah, I agree. And then, the last kind of big thing that I wanted to get into is talking about input component data. And actually, this kind of builds off of something else, which is called command data. So let me just go ahead and just do a public iCommand data. And so you can see here with the iCommand data, of course, we can have a public float called value here. And then you'll see that we do have this red little squiggly line under this iCommand data. And from that, we can go ahead and implement the missing members. So this kind of forces us to implement this public network tick property, which can be getted and setted. And so basically what this means is this iCommand data is kind of a wrapper for a dynamic buffer, where this basically keeps track of the values for this, custom value that we have set here at every network tick received for the past 64 network ticks. So essentially it's a ring buffer. So it kind of, will populate the buffer, and then it will start over from the beginning and then start repopulating that buffer. So it just kind of overwrites everything in it after that. So this is really handy for data. So these iCommand data, this is again just kind of a constant flow of communication between the client and the server. And this is kind of another way that the client can kind of have some authority of sending things up to the servers through this command data. So basically we would say set a value at a given network tick, and then we can look up that data at that given tick. One of the things about command data is I can't remember if this happens with all command data or just input component data, because input component data is a little bit more kind of important. But I believe, if it is with command data as well, when this data is being synchronized, you don't just get the value for that one network tick, but you actually get the value for the previous 3 or 4 network ticks. The reason is just because there is a little bit of redundancy baked in there. If a network tick was missed or you got some corrupted data, so the Netcode for entities can just do a little bit of extra validation logic to make sure that data is all correct and everything. So yeah, I do think these command datas are a nice thing to have. They're can be kind of a little bit cumbersome to work with sometimes, as you'll see in the tutorial if you go through that. There are a couple of quick little hacks and workarounds and some things that I had to do to get them to work all correctly. But I do think in general they are a pretty good solution for this. And then so just kind of building off of that, we have this input component data. This input component data is essentially just a wrapper for this command data. You'll see that we don't have a public network tick to get and set. That's just because this input component data, it just handles all that for you. So anytime that we're dealing with input component data, we can just treat this as a regular component, and then it worries about doing all the accesses to the dynamic buffer and everything just through code generation. So that is again kind of one of the benefits that ECS provides us with this whole code generation and everything like that.
Yeah, we got a question maybe that's relevant for if you can.
Yeah. So how to handle client and server only components. For instance, I don't want the server entity to have rendering related components. Yep, that is a great point. So one thing that we can do is, with this ghost prefab type here, we can basically just set this here. So I think with this, so we can set the prefab type to be for client. So this basically means that the prefab is only going to, or this component is only going to exist on client types. And then same thing if we wanted to say like a server only one, we have that there. And of course we can, mix and match these by doing like a client and then do the little just pipe character there and do, clients or servers kind of thing. Yeah. So it's actually pretty simple to do for, these custom Ghost components that we have. That's kind of the input component data. Do you do something kind of similar with your input component? Like, do you have any kind of, I think you had mentioned that you do some type of buffering like this for some certain things.
Yeah, this is where mine is not code generated, which I suspect most of this is. Because I only may do this for like everything that controls the character sort of in the world, which I want to be able to interpolate to make smooth. But that's more like I have 60 slots per second, 60 frames per second, and I just send data about input and position and rotation every frame to make it as fast as smooth as possible. And then I do some tick translation, so I understand like, the client sent this at this tick, which corresponds to this tick on the other clients or the under server or whatever. And then they just put that into this long ring buffer. But that ring buffer is like, it's like spaced out if you miss frames. It doesn't fill in between. Mm-hmm. If you miss a few frames, then you get a gap there. But then when it reads from it, it takes like, I don't know, maybe it's like 40 millisecond delay or 60 or something like that. So it backs up a little bit into the history to make sure that we have a proper information, and then it just interpolates between the most relevant values, and that works very good. It's just that's. I don't have any prediction. I don't need to do it really in any point. I just make sure that other clients appear smooth, and with a tiny a few milliseconds delay, you'll make sure that you always have some smooth data to work on, and to make sure that it's just always smooth and never extrapolated in any way, because you don't really need to do that often in this case. But that's all hand coded. That's no generation around
course,
that.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, there's the only reason that you really would want source generation for something like this is just kind of, hide implementation details for something like this.
And if I wanted to do that thing for a lot of values, and for me, it's just all of it's like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 values that is associated with the player straight up, like position, rotation, and some input, and that's it. Yeah. And everything else, I'm just snapshots synchronizing and not interpolating anything.
Nice. And then, one other thing that I did want to point out related to input was this concept of input events. So the purpose that this solves is essentially when we're reading input, we're going to be kind of constantly every frame on our client writing to our input component. If we can check if like the player is pressing a certain button, or they're just clicked or something like that. And again, our clients can run at a much higher update rate than our server's network update rate. So this kind of ends up being a little bit of a problem, because if we say on one frame, the player is like pressing some input, and that's kind of associated with one, given network tick. Well, because, again, this I input component data, this is a wrapper for the I command data. And, each value is just associated with one single network tick. Well, what happens again if we're updating at a higher frame rate, and then, again, the player is pressing a key on one frame, and then the next frame comes around, and then, they're no longer pressing the key, or the, was pressed this frame is now false. But we're still associated with the same network tick. Well, our, input system is now going to override that value for this given network tick. So now it basically, acts as if the player was never pressing that key. So this was definitely something that tripped me up at the beginning as well, because it was like literally like half the time inputs were just not registering at all. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? And again, there's like, nothing that's, screaming at you in your face, telling you what's wrong. So I ended up kind of like looking through some of the ECS samples and came across this input event thing that they have here. And we can kind of dive into this code a little bit here, to basically show you how it works. So for this input event, you basically just call this set method, and then it just increments this internal counter. And then isSet is true when the count is above 0. So it's just a pretty simple, just little counter in there, to just kind of let you know if a given input had been pressed on a given network tick. So yeah, you basically just, set isSet, and then it increments that counter for that, given network tick, and everything just kind of works. So it works well. Have you had to do any kind of workarounds like that at all? Like to
I'm
make
looking.
sure?
I saw this earlier. Yeah, I think I have more or less whatever. Let me. Yeah, I have maybe exactly the same thing. I can you just go into the input event again and see? I missed. Is set count? Can you scroll down a little bit?
It's just, incrementing count, and you just have an unsigned integer for
Oh
count
yeah,
there.
okay. No, it's not really the same, but it's very similar. It's an issue you have to solve when you have this type of a solution where it's just there's no way around it really with certain type of data. So yeah, I have a similar thing, which it's also when you're interacting between the normal frame and the fixed update frame, you have a similar issue going on, and that's basically the same solution. It just needs to be more robust when you're working with networking often.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I have a very similar solution.
Nice. So yeah, I think those are kind of like some of the main code kind of things that I wanted to showcase, just kind of like, cool features of ECS. Now we can get into some of the kind of like weird things, I guess. I want to show, I guess is it in this here? Yeah, so this kind of gets into like some of the weird things that happen when it comes to dealing with this, kind of simulation frames versus network update ticks and everything like that. So one thing that I had noticed, and this was specifically occurring to me when I was running the game in the editor, and it had, and I was like having some thin clients, so it was kind of simulating a lot of things, and then the performance in the editor isn't necessarily the best. And I think I might have even had like burst disabled or something when I was like really seeing this issue. And so my server was running at less than 60 frames a second. And again, my kind of default network tick target is at 60 frames per second. So what ended up happening is there were some certain times where I was like checking for a specific network tick when I could see if one of these abilities was off its cooldown. And those ticks were just basically being missed. And, if I skipped over a tick where the entity would be on cool, or that ability came off cooldown, then again, it was like every once in a while, like, 50% of the time or whatever, the ability would just never go off cooldown. So then I could like never use that ability again throughout the duration of the game, which was obviously really annoying. So what I ended up having to do is like this weird little workaround, and I wonder, I feel like there's probably another way to do this in the API, but this is kind of like the solution that I came up with. So there's this kind of like network time component that's just like a singleton component that is just kind of like automatically comes with Netcode for entities. And from that, there's this field for the simulation step batch size. And this value is typically set to a value of 1, which basically just means that, we're just simulating one single, network update for that given frame. However, if that is the case where we're running at lower than 60 frames per second, we may need to simulate multiple frames to kind of catch up to that. So if that's the case, then this value could be like, say, like 2 or 3. So what I ended up having to do is do this like for loop to basically like check backwards through any of the network ticks to see if on one of those network ticks, if that like cooldown for one of my abilities should be expired. So it's just kind of like an ugly workaround that I had to do where I have to, simulate, like test like ticks backwards and see if the cooldown is up at that particular time. Just kind of had to go with the way that I set up these cooldowns. And that actually kind of leads into another thing that threw me off at the beginning is, just because everything is running on that fixed network tick, it's kind of hard to do timers because you can't really use like time-based timers because things kind of get out of sync between the client and server. So really it's kind of like best practice to use network ticks as your timer. So I'm saying, when I spawn an ability, I spawn ability at, network tick 75. And then, I pre-calculated ahead of time that I know, the cooldown should take 100 ticks. Well, I know that on tick 175, my cooldown should now be up. So that's just kind of like, the best practice way of how you can kind of like synchronize timers across the network. So then, yeah, again, there's kind of some weird things that you need to consider where you have to like, check backwards and all that. So
I actually this is something we should talk about in depth and not now, but like I have a different experience of this issue actually. I base a lot of stuff in my game on the time and not ticks. But I'm sure there is a nuance here which I probably missed because not like. There's probably an interesting thing around where it's a good idea and where it's a bad idea. I have a lot of things where I think like just the time, like a fixed time in sort of in space or in time space, and all of the clients knows this specific point, and they like do some stuff comparing this time in the future and where I'm right now, and then they interpolate through a curve and do some movement, and then they all end up at the exact same frame doing what they want to do on this time step or a time point. And that's not step based, that's just purely a float where 1 is 1 second. So I'm fascinated to see how this all comes together, and it's probably some interesting things that I don't know about how because I've never used a tick way of looking at it, which now I want to see how that works more properly and see how it differs.
The reason that I did that is because I was kind of using like more of a traditional timer based approach at first. And then again was just kind of like running into some weird issues with the server authoritative model of synchronizing timers, and it just wasn't quite working properly. So I had actually put up a forum thread on the ECS forums, and there are a couple of people who work in the like on the Netcode for Entities package who are very active in the Netcode for ECS forums. So if you do have any questions, I would highly recommend going there because they've been extremely helpful for me for, answering some of these problems and then kind of giving me some of the best practices. And this was one of the things that they had mentioned, to use kind of more of a network tick based approach for timers, because, you can always count on network ticks to, always be synchronized across your servers and your clients.
Yeah, that's something to get into one day. Yeah, I'm gonna read up on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's not like too difficult, but it is way more annoying to, deal with network ticks as timers than, just like a float value as a timer, right?
I guess it depends a little bit on how you set up the different
I
progression
mean, it's just a lot more like code you have to write, and
Yeah,
you know,
I guess.
'cause you
Yeah,
have to like, set
I've
up these
only
network
experienced
ticks
one side
and
of this.
calculate, what the end tick is going to be and synchronize that. And, instead of just like, oh, here's a float value that I just decrement every frame or something.
Yeah. Well, the float value that I use is not incremented everything. It's just like they agree upon a specific time through some back and forth in
Right.
space, and then there's just an offset on the local computer. So your local computer
Okay.
needs to
Yeah.
run in the same, and then they just offset that
Yeah.
yeah. So that's how
Yeah.
it works in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
case.
So this approach is pretty similar, but it just uses network ticks
Ticks
instead
instead.
of a
Yeah. Well,
float timer.
I can
Yeah.
see that being practically very similar in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And let me see about some other things that I had here that I wanted to talk about. So yeah, and then just kind of like my general development experience with this. I had originally started experimenting with this project on just regular ECS 1.0 and the fully released version of 1.0, not like a pre-release version or anything like that, for ECS as well as Netcode for entities and all that. And during development, I had just all kinds of random unnecessary errors, which was just like really annoying. Like the error or the console was just being constantly spammed with errors, and it was just a lot of nothing that I was doing wrong. It was just weird bugs basically happening in the editor, and it seemed like it was happening much more with the Netcode for Entities package than I had been experiencing with regular ECS. So that was quite annoying. However, when I upgraded to some of the more recent versions, again, I actually filmed the tutorial on the 1.2.0 dash pre-release 6 version. As I was going through and making the project again, as I was like filming it for the tutorial video, I was not seeing as many of those errors. Still a few kind of from time to time sort of thing, but it seems like that has gotten better, I would say, definitely. Because that was definitely a pain point for me at the beginning. There was just like a bunch of errors, things were getting in the way, the editor was crashing on me quite frequently. So it does seem to be in a better state now, which I'm certainly glad of, but certainly something to be aware of. Honestly, as I was like initially using it, I was having such a bad experience in the editor. I'm like, there's no way that I could see like a actual production studio using this in production, just because of like how frustrating it was to be. And it really sucks because like Netcode for entities itself works so well. I've just been ranting for the past however long about how many cool features it has and everything like this, and that stuff has pretty much all worked great throughout development. But just again, the experience in the editor was like extremely frustrating. Again, I do think it is in a better state in the 1.2 version, and I know that's something that they're continually working on, supporting and getting better at. But that's definitely just something that I had to bring up because the development experience was quite frustrating for a while, especially towards the beginning, which was annoying because I'm like, trying to learn this new stuff and just keep running into these errors.
Yeah, you can imagine that keeping me from jumping on this train back in 2020, I think. Yeah,
Right.
4 years ago. the network, it was out in a very very early stage, but
Yeah.
and it wasn't just completely different environment than it is now with editor. But yeah, I just like, this is just not working at all. So and I didn't want authoritative servers. So that's, yeah. But I hear you. It's good that they are making good progress, but in the beginning it's sketchy, and there's a reason why
Right, yeah.
V-Rising doesn't use that either, but they are server authoritative, so they could have, but they
Right,
are using
yeah.
their home rolled version also, or completely homemade version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as just kind of like my opinions on learning this, I would say it actually was kind of difficult to learn. Again, like I've kind of mentioned, there were some things that I kind of had to wrap my head around just in like the kind of more server authoritative model. Like it's something that I've used in the past, but like not really something that I've like extensive experience with or that I'm like using on a daily basis. So there's certainly some things I had to kind of like wrap my head around, and a lot of things that, you know, even though I read through the documentation pretty well, and you know the stuff that is in the documentation I think is really good, there were still quite a few gaps in you know, in the documentation, things that like, you know, weren't obvious, that I had to do a lot of just experiments and experimentation and testing on my own to, you know, figure out how to get things to work properly. And you'll see, you know, like I was showing, I had to like implement some of these kind of like weird workarounds. And those things obviously aren't documented because it's just kind of like, you know, some error that I ran into when I was kind of like, you know, trying to make some of this gameplay, which I think is, you know, kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to make like, you know, a real full game project for this, is because, you know, if I'm just making like a simple thing where I'm just, you know, synchronizing the transform position of a couple things, you know, that's all pretty straightforward, but you don't run into, you know, a lot of these weird things that you will when you're actually developing out a full game. So I think that's one thing that I'm quite happy with the end result, is that, you know, even though that there were these weird workarounds and things that I ran into, you know, I'm glad that I could kind of showcase them in this video so people can, you know, kind of see those you know, things a little bit better, and hopefully kind of, you know, fill in some of those gaps in people's knowledge without having to, you know, have them run their head into the wall for a while.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so I think it's just kind of like another extra layer on like the, you know, difficulty of learning just kind of like ECS in general. You know, kind of like I've said before, is like, you know, if you really want to learn ECS, like you really need to have like a good kind of fundamental understanding of how computers work, how they best store and process data. Then you also need to learn kind of the data-oriented design paradigm in ECS, you know, separating your entities, components, and systems. And then you also need to learn the, you know, Unity ECS specific API, because it is, you know, extremely different than anything you might be used to with game objects. And then now if you're using Netcode for entities, then that's, you know, another layer on top of that, where you need to worry about this, you know, server authoritative model. There's, you know, more APIs that you need to learn of these kind of more specific components. A lot of things are kind of, you know, wrappers for other things that kind of like hide some of that logic. So it is a quite advanced thing that, yeah, I think you kind of have to have a lot of like kind of background understanding to really get the most out of it.
I just gotta point out that I completely agree with most of the with what you're saying. I think a lot of it is, you know, it's just network programming. You mentioned a lot of like edge cases, which was weird and wasn't documented. And from my perspective, like I really understand why what you mean, and like but for me it's like, well, there's no way around that there's gonna be like just a ton of weird edge cases if you're doing anything that is like just a normal game with some unique with some unique features. Because like I take the example of like a gun. I told this to students here in where I live, who study this, and like if you have like a shooting a gun, like simple thing, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna do a first person shooter networked. So do you synchronize the aiming and then just like one input and then you do the rest, or do you like synchronize exactly where the gunshot is aimed and exactly that, and then like synchronize
Right,
in
right.
effect? Or like there's like a 5-6 different steps which you can like anywhere you can like cut it, and like this is where I'm
That's a
gonna
great point,
send
yeah.
over a message to the other side, and then resimulate it over there. And then you'll need to make sure that these resimulations are like not deterministic. They just need to like end up sort of in the same place and not diverge in any case. But there's thousands of ways to do just a simple discharge of a gun in a first-person shooter networking, and there's at least 10 of them are excellent solutions, but completely different. So
that is a really good point. There's like so many variables about, you know, how you actually want to handle things for your specific case for your game. So, you know, of course it'd be impossible for Unity to document all that stuff. And, you know, it doesn't really make sense to. But yeah, you know, like you were actually just saying about, you know, where you can kind of draw that line about, you know, where you want to make that cutoff. I do think that Netcode for Entities does give you some good tools to allow you to do that. You know, like what I was showing with the whole, you know, Ghost prefab synchronization, saying, you know, this component only belongs on, you know, these types of entities. So I think it, you know, lends itself well to, you know, figuring out where you can kind of make that cutoff.
Yeah, but it's hard, and I think they are doing a good job so far with the API and everything, but network gaming is always going to be
networking is hard, man. Yeah. And then, yeah, actually just real quick on the, just kind of the Netcode for Entities working well in general. I think, you know, everything as far as it comes to, you know, client prediction and the simulated rollback, you know, again, once I kind of got over that initial hurdle of figuring out how to get it to work correctly, I think it's worked great. I think it, you know, technically runs very well. It seems to be a good and adequate solution for the problems that it's trying to solve. And I think it's really great that a lot of that stuff is just kind of handled out of the box for you. So there isn't really a whole lot of complicated setup as long as you just stick to the, you know, couple simple, you know, things that you need to set up for that.
Yeah. There is a comment that is quite old, but I just wanted to see here.
Bring it up. I feel like we can get into our
Stray says
Q&A here now.
Show, is that how you do it? Yeah, prefer using callback. That was on the event input event. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's misunderstanding a little bit what the problem is, because he's like, well, if you do polling of the input, then you won't have this problem. But the problem is that you can have like two different valid inputs on the same network tick, and you just have to like choose somehow to make sure that one of them is the one that you want, and then override the other one. Because like you said, if you let go of a key in the middle of a network tick and you get a callback from the input, like he let go of space, then you don't have any space. The Boolean is not set anymore, and you lost that because it just happened instantly on one frame, on one network tick. So in that case, you need to have a special situation where you handle that. But otherwise, you know, callback based input is a pretty good idea in a lot of cases, but that's not exactly the problem that this input event is solving, if I understand it correctly.
Right. Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if anyone else has any additional questions, we can go ahead and answer them, or if there's anything that you might want to see in my Netcode for Entities here. I did see one here about be interesting to see how you manage the camera for clients. Well, I'll tell you, it's extremely simple. It is 100% game object based. Let me see. You have just this camera target, which has a little camera controller on it here. And then it has just kind of some parameters where, you know, we can set where it moves. I have this little checkbox so we can actually draw where the camera can go. Let's see, I don't have gizmos on. So then, yeah, you see there's just kind of like this little yellow box, and that's just like basically where the camera is valid to be at. And yeah, it's just completely game object based. It just detects when the mouse is at the edges of the screen and does all that. And then I am kind of setting the camera position in, where am I doing that? I think it's in a client-side system. I think it's the initialize local champ. Nope. Initialize main camera. Nope. I do set up the, I do make like a camera singleton so that there is like, you know, one thing when the player gets spawned, that it like sets the camera, and it just uses like this camera singleton to access that. But pretty standard stuff there. And then, yeah, Tobias, do you have any other questions on any netcode for entities things at all, or anything that you might want to see in particular?
No, I think it's yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that. That's
Cool. Sounds good
we're-
to me. Well, yeah, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video, or come join us over on Discord over at tmg.dev/discord, or maybe even better, just go ahead and post them in the comment section of the Netcode for Entities tutorial. And yeah, I'm really excited for people to have some time to go through that. And yeah, I'm glad it's finished, and I'm glad it's out there. So yeah. All right, so with that, we can move over into our dynamic allocation of the week, which is just kind of our fun little wrap-up segment where we just kind of bring some interesting things to the table to talk about. And yeah, so Tobias, what do you got for the dynamic allocation of the week here?
I just have a link to a podcast that I listened to like 4 times at this point since it came out like 1.5 years ago, I think. Can I post it like this? People might have seen it. Lex Fridman interview with John Carmack, creator. Maybe we talked about. I don't know. It's just a very very interesting interview. A lot of philosophy involved about AI and all sorts of things. But also like fascinating to hear him talk about. One example that is super fascinating. He's like, well, when I develop games, when I write code, I always have the debugger on. Well, for us as a
Yes. Yeah.
Unity developers, that's a little bit different. The debugger
Yeah.
is super slow, but if it would be fast, I would do exactly what he does, and it's like having it hooked up and just instantly going through the code that you just wrote, and not pressing play and letting it try to see if it works, just like going through every line of code and just, am I understanding what I'm writing properly? And I think because he's like, well, every system is way too complex for a human to actually understand it fully in their head.
Right.
So you
Right.
should just use the debugger to just step through it and make sure, because the computer
Yeah.
will just like
And
you're
yeah,
you're wrong.
confirm that the computer is doing what you think that the computer is actually going to do.
Yes. So very, very good talk about that. And then it's just a lot of interesting philosophy talks, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. No, this was a really great podcast. I actually think I did a video on this a while back where I brought up actually that point that you said about
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah, about connecting the debugger and stepping through it. And then I think there was like one other point that he mentioned that I can't remember that I talked about in that video. But yeah, this was definitely a fascinating podcast. I mean, John Carmack is such an interesting character. I love listening to any long form thing that he's involved in.
Yeah.
So yeah, go check that out. So then mine is going to be this game that I just saw a trailer pop up this for the other day. It's called Empire of the Ants. So this is actually a game made with Unreal Engine 5. And so I believe it's like an RTS game with ants basically, but it's like super like photorealistic. Like as you can see, there's like pretty amazing graphics going on here. I know it for sure is coming to PS5 because obviously this is on the PlayStation's YouTube channel here. But should be coming out later this year, and I think as it goes along, we start to see just more and more large numbers of ants, large entity counts. So I think anything that with large entity count gaming, it's definitely something that kind of like piques my interest. And so I'm kind of curious to see if they would be curious to know if they used any type of the Unreal's mass entity system to implement some things like this. I'm sure they probably would, like if that tech is available and they're doing something that's exactly use that to take advantage of that. Yeah, it would be interesting to know a little bit more. But yeah, it's coming out later this year. Again, it's called Empire of the Ants. I'll go ahead and link the trailer in the comment section here.
There is it just me, or if you like roll back a bit, the camera seems to be way back, maybe half of it or something, the camera seems to be a little bit naively implemented, like bumps along the road.
Yeah. It's kind of stuck to that ant almost, like it doesn't have
Probably
like a,
early, it might be fixing that, but that would be something.
they don't have no Cinemachine and Unreal.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's cool stuff.
Yeah. So it's definitely something to I'll have my eye on. So yeah. All right. Well, and with that, that brings us to the end of episode 8 of the Hot Path Show, our last Power of 2 episode number for the next couple of months here until episode 16. So yeah, and that's our kind of Netcode for Entities special. So thank you all for joining us. Once again, go enjoy my 6-hour Netcode for Entities tutorial. I think there's a lot of good info in there that hopefully you'll found some value in. Once again, next week is going to be our GDC special episode live from the Unity offices. And so yeah, lots of exciting things coming up. So yeah, with that, thank you for joining me, Tobias. And yeah, you got anything else any parting words for us?
I'm almost tempted to say code on like I blurred out last time.
That's right. Code on.
Yeah, but yeah, nice thing. Yeah.
Sweet. Sounds good. Well, thanks everybody. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.